CHIRP Radio's first time is a quarterly, live-lit music series recorded at Martyrs in North Center. The theme this round was First Try.
In keeping with the themes of dungeons and penises and kissing, I'm going to talk about the Greek church. This is actually about my first few tries taking communion in the Greek Orthodox Church. I'm not at all religious. I used to lump Jesus and Santa Claus into the same category. They were both basically just knickknacks that would appear on the coffee table at certain times of the year. And my mom, a single night shift working mother of three, was often reluctant to drag her ass out of bed early on a Sunday. It's understandable, despite the fact that my grandfather and great uncle started the first Greek church in West Michigan back in the early 1900s, which is where I'm from. That's West Michigan, not the early 1900s. Before I get to the actual taking of communion, though, we should talk about horror movies. It's natural. I was born in 1977, and in 76 a film came out called The Omen. Is anyone familiar with The Omen? Yeah. So, it's a story of a little boy who happens to be the Antichrist. And it's his destiny to rule the world. So people throughout the film are killing themselves and others so that he might eventually grow up to be president. And Antichrist as president is certainly a timely thing to think about, in my opinion. Anyway, the little boy who was the son of the devil was named Damien, which is also my name. The only physical mark of his evil lineage was that he had a 666, of course, on his scalp somewhere under his hair. Other than that, he was just like any other pasty little British kid. Now, I was moderately teased about my movie namesake as a kid. I have two brothers, 6 and 8 years older, who really led the charge, though. A scenario I remember is that one of my brothers would sit on my chest and pin my arms back with his knees, while the other would rifle through my hair looking for the 666 that was undoubtedly tattooed there by Satan himself. I don't remember how many times this happened, but it did leave an impression. So church. Now, we did go at times. Holidays, funerals, memorial services. In my childhood, it seemed like someone was dying every 6 months or so, and there was a memorial service for them 6 months after that. So there was a lot of mourning going on. Now, the bulk of the services were in Greek, which I was never taught, so it was quite literally all Greek to me. This meant that what I focused on, though, was the art and the music and the pageantry of the place. It was a beautiful sanctuary with ornate leaded glass chandeliers, far too many for the size of the room. The altar spanned the width of the church and was backed by a wall of oak panels, many of which were quietly closing doors that led to the chancel behind the altar. Each panel had these convex, somberly colored, oval-framed religious icons painted on them under heavy varnish. And I used to stare at them through the services, wondering who painted them and if people in biblical times really had skin that color. As for pageantry, it was all out Gothic robes, red and white satin, gold embroidery, ornate scepters, a 5-tiered silver thurible that diffused the incense that the priest would swing around. He'd wear a pointy Pope-type hat that just came above his Martin Scorsese eyebrows and his long salt and pepper beard. Serious Greek Orthodox shit. And the sanctuary was filled with worn smooth wooden pews holding all the Greeks of the community, everyone in suits and dresses, starched white collars and pantyhose and squeaky tight shoes. Under the heat of the chandeliers and in the layers of Sunday best clothes, church was always stifling, to put it gently. Less gently, it was inferno fucking hot, and I was always uncomfortable. I was around 8 years old when my godmother told my mom that I should take communion. I had no idea what this meant, but I knew that drinking wine was involved, so I was down. My godmother was this sweet, gaunt woman with a very subtle smile. Her name was Melieni Serendakis, which always sounded kind of like magic to me. As a young woman, she'd eloped with her first cousin, and due to genetics, there were several miscarriages. Her husband died young. I don't really remember why anymore, and she never remarried, which for all intents and purposes began her career as a godmother. She eventually had 14 different godchildren by the time she died. I didn't know her very well because she died when I was still pretty young as well, like a lot of the Greeks in the family, which had nothing to do with me. But every time I had to get dressed up for an official Sears portrait, it was Melieni's doing. Apparently, you can't receive the blood of Christ if you've had breakfast. Like a lot of church traditions, this made absolutely no sense to me, but basically, you couldn't eat if you were going to go and have communion. So there I'd be in my own starchy white shirt under the airless, incense-filled, oppressive heat of the church, surrounded by all the sweaty Greeks in West Michigan, with a loudly growling, empty stomach. The combination of being overheated and starved always yielded the same results. About halfway through the service, all the blood would leave my head, and I'd feel faint and nearly pass out. 3 separate times this happened on mornings when I was supposed to take my first communion. About halfway through the service, I'd have to leave the sanctuary, 8 years old, mind you, go to the basement bathroom, which was always kind of terrifying, sit in a stall and rest my cheek against the cool tile wall until some of the blood went back up to my head and the clamminess subsided, which all made me start to think that maybe I really was the Antichrist. That this was God's way of telling me I didn't belong in his house. It's quite the mindfuck for a little kid. I did watch a lot of horror movies back then. I saw The Omen a few times. I saw The Exorcist, The Gates of Hell, Hellraiser, the classic family favorites. And like most people probably in this room, I grew up watching a lot of television as well. Being that my mom worked nights, it fell on my brothers to quote-unquote watch me, which meant that most nights I was up well after midnight with Sanford and Son and Star Trek, my real babysitters. I also watched a shit ton of Happy Days. Arthur Fonzarelli was about the coolest person I think I'd ever encountered, and to a certain degree I emulated him as a kid. And I thought if anyone could get me through my first communion, it would be the Fonz. So I asked myself, as many people throughout history probably have, what would the Fonz do? Well, frankly, if the Fonz was hungry, the Fonz would eat. I mean, he's Italian. So the next Sunday that rolled around with the ominous cloud of communion hanging over it, I simply snuck the box of Cookie Crisp from the kitchen cabinet into my bedroom while my mom was getting ready and stuffed my face before she could wrangle us brothers into the car. This might have been the first time that cookies ever saved my life. Needless to say, I felt much better sitting in the fragrant church heat with a belly full of breakfast cookies. I felt like I could finally make it up there and have my share of wine/blood of Christ. So I told my godmother that I felt okay to go through with it, and she was very proud. Because she was my godmother, it was her duty to take me up there for my first communion, so it was a bigger deal for her than it was for me. I was really just in it for the hooch. And she wanted us to be the last in the congregation to go up, to really savor the moment in front of the whole community. The way it works is everyone gets up, first the rows of pews closest to the altar. People file to the back of the church, and then funnel to the center aisle and approach from there. Once you're at the altar, you take these 3 short steps up to where the priest is waiting for you. And he holds this magnificent gold chalice in one hand, from which hangs a red cloth that he grasps in his other hand, along with a golden spoon. He then dips that spoon into the chalice, and you say your Greek baptismal name. Mine is Damienos. He dips the spoon into your mouth then, and touches your lips with the red cloth. It's very intimate. And he blesses you. At that point, you turn, you take a piece of bread, always baked by my yaya, from this silver platter held by an altar boy, and you go back to your seat. So I'm 8 years old. I'm feeling good because I just fonzed my stomach with Cookie Crisp. I'm watching all 200 plus people go up, say their Greek names, have their wine, get their bread, go back to their seats. And then there at the end of the line is Melieni, Serendakis, and me. Don't worry, it goes well. I'm calm, I'm relaxed, I'm maybe feeling a little full of myself. I step up at this point closer to the priest than I've probably ever been. I tell him my baptismal name. He gives alcohol to the minor. Delicious. He pats my lips dry, and I turn around, facing the entire congregation from the altar, from this hallowed stage, everyone having reclaimed their seats by now. And many people in the pews were cousins, honorary aunts and uncles, still strangers to me really, but family somehow in the Greek sense. And they were all wearing their most stoic church faces, having just ingested some God. And I pause. You've been there. I take a long, slow look out over the community, and I kind of hook my thumbs up into the air while simultaneously throwing back my shoulders. And in my best Arthur Fonzarelli, I say, "Hey!" It was the first and only time I'd ever heard the whole congregation laugh as one. Charm of the devil, perhaps. Thank you for listening.
Two, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. Put your glad rags on and join me, hun. Gonna have fun when the clock strikes 1. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. We're gonna rock, rock, rock till the broad daylight. Gonna rock around the clock tonight. When the clock strikes 2, 3, and 4, if the band slows down, we'll yell for more. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. We're gonna rock, rock, rock till the broad daylight. Gonna rock around the clock tonight. When the chop strikes 5, 6, and 7, we'll be right in 7th heaven. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. We're gonna rock, rock, rock till the broad daylight. Gonna rock around the clock tonight. When it's 8, 9, 10, 11, 2, going strong and so will you. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. We're gonna rock, rock, rock till the broad daylight. Gonna rock around the clock tonight. When the clock strikes 12, we'll cool off then. Start rocking around the clock again. We're gonna rock around the clock
You can find this and other Chirp Radio interviews and podcasts at chirpradio.org/podcasts.